Backstretch Banter on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio with RFK Racing. Another week in the books of NASCAR. What a weekend it was. It was a fun night race in Richmond over the weekend. Not exactly the result from a winning perspective. Denny Hamlin in victory lane doesn't do anything for me, but 2 top 10s for RFK. That was awesome. And back on the show to help us talk about it today is the senior director of Roush Fenway Keselowski, Mr. Brandon Lee. By the way, we have a great show. We have Scott Bowen, who's the human performance manager, which the guys tell me he's the coach of the pit crew. That's a fancy, souped-up title to say this guy is nitty-gritty and coaching the pit crew, and he'll be on in about 10 minutes or so. But Brandon Lee is back. We love B. Lee. Let's talk some Richmond. Brandon Lee, welcome back to your show. How are you, sir?
What's up, Chris? I'm doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I feel like every single week that we do a radio show, things feel even bigger and better for RFK. 2 top 10s last week in Richmond. And what's interesting is the qualifying hasn't been all that good for RFK, but the results on Sunday have been. From your perspective at the track, how would you describe the team's performance coming off of last weekend and what we've seen consistently now for the last couple of weeks?
Yeah, you kind of hit on it there, Chris. We're really good at grinding out these finishes, I would say. And I feel like you would get that from a lot of different guys on the team. To your point, qualifying kind of hit or miss sometimes, but you have these longer races and the way they play out, some strategy calls here and there go our way. And, that wasn't fully the case this week, but nonetheless, there were some strategy involved. We started on rain tires, which was a first outside of, I think we kind of experimented with that last year at North Wilkesboro. So this would have been the first time outside of that took place. So, two really good finishes. Top 10s are, if you can string together top 10s a lot, then you're doing a lot of things right. The interesting piece is, and I've heard Brad and Chris say this since Richmond, when you're disappointed with top 10s, that's a good thing. And they were both pretty disappointed Sunday night, and rightfully so, knowing that Chris was the defending winner there at Richmond last year, and Brad led a lot of laps in that race as well. So we're top 10s are great, but when you're disappointed with those, that's even better thing, because that means how much better we can be. So
it makes you really feel good about the team and where things are. And I'm with you. Like a couple of years ago, a couple of top 10s for Roush Fenway Keselowski would have been a big deal. And nowadays we want to be top 5. We want to be in victory lane. And that's the expectation, especially after Chris found his way into victory lane 3 times last year. I think it's coming. I really do. I think this team is consistently good. Going back to the qualifying element of it, though, I find it interesting because for years people would talk about, how much does qualifying matter? How much does it matter where you start? At least so far, it hasn't mattered much for RFK, but what has the conversation been like at headquarters about how to improve qualifying?
Yeah, there's just so much parity, right? I think if you looked at the timing this weekend, a few thousandths of a second actually mattered one way or the other. And that's probably the case most every week, if I'm being honest. A lot of it, there's a lot of things that go into qualifying. A lot of things come out of it. So pit stall selection comes out of qualifying. So a lot of weeks, that's a big piece of the conversation. I think we had Scott on here a few weeks ago, and he was talking about how qualifying is so pivotal at Bristol for many reasons, but one of those is pit selection. So that's part of the process. But yeah, to more answer your question, the practice these days is just so limited, right? And the notes our teams have to go off of, they are what they are based off of the last races we've had. So look, some weeks you hit it nail on the head, and some weeks you don't. And fortunately, the weeks where we might, finish 6th or 7th in our group and not advance to the final round and maybe qualify 12th to 15th, it is what it is, but the good thing is you have the whole race for it to play out, and everybody's on the same playing field. And you'll have that scenario go both ways. Sometimes you'll have guys that'll practice in the 30s, and then they'll qualify top 10. I think I saw a couple of cases of that this week, actually. Qualified is not always the biggest indicator. Neither is practice, really. I know Chris was atop the charts. I think he was maybe top 3 on Saturday, if I recall correctly, in one of his groups. But yeah, he didn't make the final round of qualifying, but you saw that we were able to pull out a top 10. So it's just hit or miss. And obviously, look, everybody would want to unload perfectly and qualify and practice top 5, right? But reality is that never happens. So you have the race to play out, and the ones that are better at making strategy calls and finding ways to grind it out are the ones that are going to come out on top. So that's the way we look at
How
it.
much do you notice? How much do you notice being at the track? The difference, the work that goes in after qualifying, after the car is run on Saturday, and now it's Sunday, and we're getting ready to race. How many things are done to the car that are learned from qualifying? And we've had, data guys on this show before and talked analytics. How much is done from a statistical perspective that you've noticed that goes into what the engineers are doing on the car and the mechanics?
Yes, a good question. I mean, it's actually interesting. Physically speaking, once the car qualifies on Saturday and it's done, it goes in the garage stall and it's not touched again until Sunday morning.
Sits there.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
it sits there. Now, that's not to say there's not work being done on the back end, obviously. After every qualifying session when it's on Saturday, our teams go to a larger debrief that involves the drivers, crew chiefs, engineers, and that's really where the engineers kind of get in the weeds and figure out what simulations they're going to run that afternoon, that night, and figure out how they can make the car better, frankly. So a lot of times while, the garage might close at 1 or 2 o'clock on a Saturday and most of the mechanics and folks are out, enjoying their Saturday afternoon, our engineers are back in their hotel rooms trying to figure out, what are those couple tenths we can get back to make our cars better. So it's a tricky game because, there's only so much you can do these days. In terms of touching the car once it's done. I mean, that's the point of in-pound qualifying and in-pound racing. So it's a battle, and obviously the ones that can figure out the very little gains we can make in that small window, those are the ones that are going to come out on top whenever, you start the race on Sunday.
It's a fine art. It really is. And I love hearing all the nuances of what happens behind the scenes and the stuff that race fans don't get to see on Sunday during the race. We're talking to our buddy Brandon Lee, who is the Senior Director of Communications for Roush Fenway Keselowski Racing. It is a weekend coming off of a really fun race in Richmond. Now we look ahead. Big Martinsville race coming up this weekend. I know in high expectations for RFK. We'll talk about Martinsville in just a second. I am curious. I thought about this the other day. Every time the guys are in the top 10 in stage 3 later in the race, Fox always does that thing where they, kind of zoom in on the car and they talk about the guys to watch and stuff like that. And a lot of times we see the 17 and the 6 throughout this 2024 season. With that said, I was really curious what kind of feedback RFK has gotten from their sponsors, whether it be Build Submarines or King's Hawaiian or Consumer Cellular. I know Bodyguard's going to be on the number 6 this week, but I got to think they're feeling pretty good about how visible these cars have been.
Yeah, no, they are, Chris. It's actually funny. All of those things you said add up to larger numbers and reports and data that we get back from different sources. And everything you said is true, right? Like our sponsors see it, they're feeling it, they're hearing it, they're seeing it in the results of their product and their brand and what they do. But yeah, we actually have folks in this building that run reports weekly, frankly, for our sponsors. And, we get values and we call them MEV numbers, and we get those back. And those really track back what we're getting in terms of TV value and our social value and stuff like that. So, yeah, absolutely. It makes a difference. And, the more you're on TV, frankly, the more you're talked about, right? It's kind of obvious to say, but it's true. And that all ties back to, essentially larger exposure and more impressions for our partners, which is always a good thing. So, yeah, the more we run inside the top 10, the more TV covers us, and the story goes on from there.
I find it fascinating, that side of the NASCAR business. I don't know how many race fans do, but I think they do, because race fans are so, I think, antiquated with sponsorship. They understand what it means for the sport. They understand that it's the lifeline of the cars that they love. And I think as a result, they kind of treat the companies maybe a little bit different than the average commercial. And so I think all that matters. I think that the better you run, the more you're on TV, the sponsor's gonna, stay loyal and not want to, pull out and be a part of the program and get great results as a part of it, and it all goes hand in hand. I mean, I think it all certainly uh, really goes well together. And look at Fastenal. I mean, we had a representative on from Fastenal on the show a couple weeks ago who said when Chris Buescher, the last time he went to the convention, which I think is coming up, the next one, but the last time he didn't have to wear his fire suit. Everybody knew who he was. Everybody was excited to meet him, and I think that certainly has a lot to do with what's going on in the track.
Absolutely.
Let's get into the race coming up this weekend, then we'll break and we'll talk to Scott Bowen, who runs things on the pit crew side. Martinsville this weekend, fun track, a lot of history. How we feeling from the RFK perspective?
Yeah, going into Martinsville, it's one of those tracks that maybe 3, 4, 5 years ago we were scratching our head on it, to be honest with you. Jack's had some success there over the years, but in the past, I don't know, 5 or 8 years, we're kind of in the middle ground. But I say that in the last couple years, we found kind of a edge on speed again. We've qualified pretty well there, actually. In the last couple years, I think we have maybe 5 top 10 starting spots, which is pretty good. Considering Chris's history there and Brad's history. But yeah, last year, Chris finished, I think, 8th in the round of 8 cutoff race in the playoffs. Brad got caught up in an incident that ultimately retired him, unfortunately, too early. But yeah, I would say optimistic going in, and especially knowing kind of our short track program and how it's improved over the last 1 to 2 years. Things are looking up going into Martinsville is what I would say.
I think we're going 1 and 2. I've said it before.
There you go.
But I
believe
keep calling it this time. I do. I believe it. I'm speaking it into existence right now. I really do. I think these cars are running really well. I think with a little luck, we're going to be in victory lane really soon. And in my opinion, the only thing that gets validated every week is that this is a bona fide playoff team that's going to have a chance when it's all said and done. And I think both teams have really proven that here over the last month. Buescher going top 10 every week. I mean, he's steady as she goes. He's like an old Jack White song, man. It is pretty incredible, the steadiness. And that is hard to do. To be in that position every single week with a chance to be in the top 10 is an art form. And I think Buescher's got it down right now, as does Brad after last weekend. Brandon Lee, you're a king. We appreciate you, and we'll talk again soon. Thank you, pal.
Awesome. Sounds good, Chris. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Do not go anywhere. We're going to go, like the whole point of the show is to go behind the scenes. We want to go behind the scenes of RFK, behind the scenes of the NASCAR world. I'm really pumped about our next guest because Scott Bowen's going to join us. Now, based on Scott's title, he's the human performance manager. You might be like, what is that? Well, we'll explain, and I guarantee you it's going to be fascinating when we come back. Chris Childers, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. It is Backstretch Banter with RFK Racing. We are back here. It is Backstretch Banter with RFK Racing, Sirius XM NASCAR Channel 90. I'm your host, Chris Childers. The whole point of the show, and again, we do it once a week, every single Wednesday, is to go behind the scenes of a NASCAR team. We talk to all the different parts of the team, whether it's an engineer, whether it's a spotter, whether it's a data guy, pit crew side of things, weightlifting. I mean, we have done a little bit of everything. Chris Buescher, drivers. We've had Matt McCall on the show. We've had Graves on the show, the crew chief. So a little bit of everything going behind the scene of the team, which I think is really unique and really cool. And quite frankly, as a NASCAR fan, I got to be honest, I've learned a lot about the sport just doing the show, just talking to these guys and finding out what they do on a daily basis. So let's keep that trend going. Scott Bowen is our guest today. He is the human performance manager at RFK. Now, when I saw that title, I said, what the hell does that mean? I have no idea what I'm supposed to talk to him about, what that means. I figured it out. It was a really fancy term for the guy who's the czar of the crew chief, the coach of the crew chief. But how would you describe, first of all, hello, Scott. How would you describe your title as human performance manager of RFK, sir?
Well, hello, Chris. Great to be here. I would say it's the head pit crew coach from that standpoint. We have a program here made up of myself, several assistant coaches, strength and conditioning coach. We have physical therapist. We have sports psych. We have nutrition. So there's a lot that goes into it, and I'm just fortunate enough to be able to work with some great individuals and great people to come up with have the best competitive pit crews that we can.
That's pretty interesting. So you work with the sports psychology side, the weightlifting side, all the little different nuances that go into having the best performance possible on a Sunday. I feel like there's a lot of different parts I want to break down, truly. And certainly working with the pit crew and coaching the pit crew is probably the thing that's going to interest most people. But from a totality perspective, what do you think would surprise people about what goes into the day-to-day of human performance when it comes to not only the drivers but the pit crew, when it comes to, weightlifting and proper diet, and how many elements go into performance that might surprise people?
I think the thing that is this sport has become more closer to the other stick and ball sports, football, basketball, baseball, etc. I like to compare us a little bit more towards baseball from the standpoint of the length of the season. Certainly we don't have, 164 games, but we do have 37, 38 weeks a year with practices that these guys are going and performing in. So it's not that dissimilar from that. And yes, we have all the ingredients of most of those other sports combined. The tough part is with this is there's a mechanical element of a race car that can impact your finish. So we can do everything right on pit road and not finish the race where we want to, or vice versa, right? We can have the fastest race car, and if we don't perform as expected on pit road, then we have undesirable outcome as well.
Well, the mechanical part, not your fault, but the pit road part, you don't want to be blamed for that.
Right, but what we want to be is one team, right?
Exactly.
Even, you know what I'm saying?
Want to be together and everything be good on a Sunday and hopefully finish in the top 10, which has been happening quite a bit lately for both the 17 and the 6 car. I find it really interesting. I find we've had, different people on the show before that handle the weight management and stuff like that. And I feel like all of that is just mind blowing when it comes to what, the amount of electrolytes you put in your body, the kind of food that you have to eat. I'm going to ask you, since you are the human performance manager, how different is the preparation physically for a driver as opposed to a guy who's on the pit crew?
I would say for the driver standpoint, certainly it is strength and conditioning. A lot of it has to do with the cardio side of it as well. They need both. On the pit crew side, I would say the cardio isn't our main emphasis, but it's more about strength, conditioning, and quickness and agility. That's probably more important for what we're doing. Now, from a mental standpoint, I don't think they're that dissimilar.
This is going to be the most disjointed interview I've ever done because as you talk, I keep getting more interested in different elements of what you do. So I'm just going to be spitballing things that come into my head because I really do find all of this so interesting. I want to get into the whole, what you do with a pit crew, how you get those guys ready, what the week looks like. But I've always been curious. I get what a pit crew guy typically looks like. I've been in enough pits. I've watched enough races. I get there's a body type for different roles. What I'm curious about, though, is when you find a talent and you say, this guy has a chance to be on a NASCAR pit crew. How long does it take for somebody to be comfortable with the conditioning needed, the speed, the urgency? I mean, we all watch. Anytime I'm at a race and if I get lucky enough to sit in one of your pit boxes, I'm always blown away by the work that you do. I'm always blown away by the work that your guys do, and it's so damn fast, and it's just unbelievable. I mean, a full tank of gas, 4 new tires, things that you'd be sitting at, tire center for hours for. This happens in 8 seconds. How long for a guy to get up to snuff on what this business means, even if they check all the physical boxes?
Well, that's a good question. It varies with each player, to be honest with you. It just depends as much on their physical. We know they're going to check the physical box, or we're really not going to, entertain having them as a part of the program. For us, we evaluate player. If a player comes in, we're going to evaluate the core values. Do they match our core values character-wise, right? If that's a part of the program, and coachability is very important because that determines that time frame, or is one of the determining factors for that. So we'll evaluate that player based on character, coachability, and then the drive that they have to want to do this. Time frame wise, we can teach a guy the fundamentals in a matter of months. The question is, can they go perform on a car that's running up front and give you consistent pit stops all day long? That can take years. That can take years.
Is there ever a guy that came in and you thought he checked all the boxes and you knew like immediately it wasn't going to happen? Has that ever happened? Like,
yes, it happens.
Like, this guy's got 2 left feet. It's just not going to happen.
Well, they can check all the boxes and just mentally can't handle the pressure on Sunday.
Yeah.
To perform. And it happens in a lot of sports. Yeah. AAA baseball and Major League Baseball, go to the game and tell me the difference of them physically. Right? What makes the difference? It's what's between the ears and the ability to be self-disciplined and how you perform under pressure and when you have to perform.
It's really interesting. I really love this conversation. Scott Bowen is our guest, who's the human performance manager. So with a pit crew guy that comes in and you talk about the pressure, I don't know how many people think about it, because they're watching a race and they think so much, Chris Buescher's 17, Brad Keselowski's number 6. We see the pit crew guys for a split second. We really don't know their names. I know they've done a little better with that lately. So there's all these guys that are really, really important to the outcome of the race that go very much, under the radar. The pressure perspective, give us an idea, if it's not coming from the media, because the media might not know who they are. The fans might not necessarily know who screwed up in the pit, who didn't, attach the tire the right way or whatever. But what is that like? Let's say there is a massive screw up, and after the race, the meeting for the person that has wronged the team, what does that look like, and how strong does a person have to be to deal with it?
Well, it depends on what the mistake was and what led up to it. You know what I'm saying? There's usually, when something happens, there's something that 2 steps back caused it. So we try not to be reactive when something like that happens, and to go back, review it, and understand the why, and trying to prevent it from happening again. I don't want an environment, we don't want an environment where players are afraid to fail or make a mistake, because guess what? We will fail if that's the case. What is it like? I mean, it's mainly reviewing it and trying to prevent it from happening again, and also having our other players that are involved in the program learn from that mistake as well. So you're just trying to prevent it from happening. Certainly, we don't want anything. You don't want to have mistakes that are repeated over and over again. Habitual mistakes become a problem. But, these guys it's fast, and you have to make decisions really quick. And sometimes things aren't going to go your way, period. And we have to be able to look out the front windshield, so to speak, no pun intended, and work towards the next week.
You've mentioned the term players several times when it comes to your pit crew guys. And again, my brain is just going with the answers here because I find this really interesting. And I think there's a lot of racing fans that would probably have these same sort of follow-ups here. So again, as fans, we look at drivers, right? We look at drivers and crew chiefs. Is players for pit crew a popular used term in NASCAR? Is that exactly how coaches look at their different pieces? Instead of, members, this is, the players on a team.
I believe so. That's what we do internally anyhow. I mean, they're our teammates. They are players. They're professional athletes. Sure. So in that standpoint, to me, they're either our athletes or our players or both. So yeah, that's how we refer to them, and very fortunate here to have some great athletes as a part of the program.
Are you in charge of identifying? I mean, you have 2 great teams that I think are really good pit crews. I've watched them in action. I've seen what you guys do. The interaction with Graves and McCall and those guys seems to be really good, and I think the results certainly are backing that up on the racetrack right now. When you go and find a guy, how do you, because here's what I think is interesting. There's no little league pit crew. There's no, high school pit crew. So who finds them? who goes and says this guy's got it, not only physically but between the ears? Because you just said that's so huge,
We
and the
handle
culture part of it's so huge.
Sorry, we handle that internally. Brock Silvers was a Division III football coach. He's got contacts all over the nation. He's an
Okay.
assistant coach. He spends a lot of time recruiting individuals, bringing them in. We evaluate them. There's a process. No, there's a difference. There's a process to a pit stop. There's a process to the recruiting as well that we have in place, and we're able to distinguish the physical and mental characteristics that are required or what we require here to be a part of our program.
When they bring him in, does everything run through you? Is there like initial testing, interviewing? How does that work?
Usually what'll happen, we'll bring Brock will recruit an individual in. We'll schedule that individual to come in and spend a couple of days with us. It's not just an
Okay.
hour here or there. They'll
Makes
come
sense.
in, we'll do the initial interview that involves all of our coaches, and then he'll run through some physical tests. We'll have them visit pit practice, be a guest at pit practice, and we'll actually, whatever position they are interested in, actually go ahead and put that piece of equipment in their hand of whatever they're going to do and start training them just to see how they perform. But more importantly, what's as important as everything for us is that individual needs to want to have the desire to do this, because if they don't, they're going to really struggle. Because most of the time we're taking someone who isn't 8 years old or isn't even 16 years old. We're taking a grown man that's usually over the age of 20, and they're having to learn something they have never done before in their life. Most of these athletes have played football or baseball or basketball, whatever that sport is, since they were children. They haven't been pitting race cars since they were children. So that is a challenge, and that's something they have to really – can they accept failure? A lot of these guys that come in have never failed. They were the best at what they did, and all of a sudden you are going to fail at something new. And can they handle that? So
It's amazing to me. What is a driver? And again, Scott Bowen is our guest, the human performance manager for RFK Racing. What is a driver pit crew relationship like? You've got Brad and Chris as the drivers at RFK. Again, I think as fans, we talk a lot about crew chief and driver relationship. I think some drivers are more respectful to their pit crews than others. I mean, there's some that don't hesitate to throw them under the bus. One of those guys just won a race this past weekend. But describe that relationship.
I think here a couple of things. Our drivers are accessible. They work out in our facility, so we're used to being around them. That's not the case at every race team. So we have a really good relationship. Our drivers, when we do have a problem, do not berate our pit crews and make it personal. At the end of the day, we're more about, all right, what are we going to do to correct the problem and be better the next week? So I can brag on both of our drivers from that standpoint that we're all one team. You know,
Yeah.
We're all going to make mistakes. If we're performing at the level we need to be performing, we're going to be pushing the envelope, and sometimes we're going to go over the edge.
What's your relationship like with one of the owners, which is a driver, which is Brad Keselowski, who's the K in the RFK? I got to think, I mean, he's been a truck owner, now he's, a cup owner. The guy's a champion racer. He's been, super successful in his career. I got to think I know from just listening to him, he really understands the science of NASCAR. From a guy like that, who's very educated in the nuances of the business, what is that like from a driver owner perspective for somebody like you in your position to work with?
It's actually a positive because he's interested.
I assume so, yeah. 'cause
Absolutely.
he's knowledgeable.
He's knowledgeable. He doesn't make assumptions, and he's process oriented. So that's what we do. I mean, pitting a race car is a process. The training process and then the pit stop itself is a process. So he understands that, and he's a full supporter of us. I can tell you that. Full support. And he's fun to work with.
Yeah.
Like I said, he's accessible. He's here.
Yeah.
He's down in the trenches.
I listen to the radios all the time on Sunday, and he is one of the. I don't know how to describe the whole Matt McCall Keselowski radio situation, but it's very professional. It is one of the most professional radios. I mean, not that all of them aren't, to a certain degree, but that one in particular, those guys really have a good business approach to what's going on a Sunday. I'm fascinated by so many layers of this. Let's keep the conversation going. let's talk about what happens during the week with a pit crew, the practice, the work, the film, all the stuff that goes into what we see on Sunday, how it differs by track, positioning. Scott Bowen, our guest, will continue the conversation next on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. It's Backstretch Banter with RFK.
Chris, that was perfect. Exactly at 30 minutes.
I did? Sweet.
Yeah. Well, I'm at 30:01.
30:01. So we've got 18 to fill.
Yes, sir.
I don't see any problem with that.
Sorry for the mumbling. I'm doing my
No,
best.
I think
I don't
it's
do a
great.
lot of these. So.
I find this so interesting, and I'm literally just kind of spitballing because I'm actually very curious.
Well, it was funny you said professional because that's one of our core values is professionalism as a company, and they keep it that way.
But not everybody is.
I mean,
honestly.
I've never
been
met
around some other
anyone.
teams.
I've never met a pit crew guy or a driver that goes out and wrecks a car or screws up a pit stop it wasn't because they didn't care.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that sometimes gets lost in the shuffle.
Yeah.
All right?
Absolutely.
Players don't make errors because they don't care or they're negligent, right?
They're human.
They're human.
Yep.
You know, if they're
It happens.
habitual, then you have to fix it.
Then you have to fix it.
But it doesn't mean they're bad people or deserve to be berated.
100%. 100%. Yeah, it really is interesting. Are you ready to come back, Thomas? Because I'm going to do that bodyguard reference thing here.
Yeah.
To what it is.
Bowen, just for
Okay.
reference, you're doing awesome from back here too. So,
Yeah, it's really cool. All right, here we go.
Hold on.
Let me hit my. Okay.
He's only saying that because he needs another 18 minutes.
He'll be fine. Ready? Okay. 3, 2, and 1. We're back here. It is Backstretch Banter with RFK Racing, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio Channel 90. I'm your host, Chris Childers. Hope you're enjoying the show so far. Scott Bowen has been our guest, the human performance manager for RFK, and it's been really interesting to find out some of the behind the scenes at RFK, what goes on with the pit crews, how they identify the right guys, the training, all that kind of stuff. I find really, really interesting. The pit crews this weekend going to have really cool fire suits on. If they are with the number 6 card, it's Bodyguard this week. If you don't know what Bodyguard is, that's Fastenal's PPE brand, sold exclusively by Fastenal. And we had a representative from Fastenal on a couple weeks ago, Brooke Milsna, who did a really cool job of talking about all the great things that Fastenal does that makes people's life way more easier in the workplace. And you can get Bodyguard, which is gloves and eyewear, reflective vest, which is the exclusive Fastenal brand. You can see it featured on the 6 car this weekend. And for the 17, one of my favorite sponsors ever, buildsubmarines.com. If you're not familiar with the website, let me say this. If you're an engineer and you are looking for a way to really, do something special and help our country, there is no cooler thing, in my opinion, than building a submarine to help protect America. Buildsubmarines.com is the way to get information, and that's going to be featured on the 17 card this week. It's been an incredible sponsorship with the 6 and the 17 all year with RFK, and I have been on that website countless times because I just think it's a really cool business to get into, building submarines. A guy who's in a cool business is our guest right now. We've been talking to him. Scott Bowen is our guest, the human performance manager for RFK. You're a pit crew guy yourself. You were experienced in the business. You've been around with Jack Roush for a long time. What attracted you first? We talked about how you go and find pit crew guys, but how did you end up in this business?
I ended up in this business, I guess it starts back in the late 70s. That's telling my age a little bit, but my uncle loved to go to North Wilkesboro and watch races, and I go with he and my cousin, Alan Stiers. He's actually in the business as well today, ironically. But we would go to those races, and a little kid, I wanted to do this. So I went to college, went to NC State, graduated there. And while I was going to school at State, I was fortunate enough through a friend of mine to go to the racetrack on weekends with RFK Racing at the time, Wally Dallenbach Jr. So I helped out on Sundays, on race day only during school, during college. Got out, administrated 401k plans for a few years, really didn't like the cube life, so ended up going to work at RFK Racing in Liberty, North Carolina. And from there, I guess that started it. So been there, been doing this ever since. I went to Petty Enterprises for a few years in 1997, the end of 97. I spent 5 years there, and while I was there, one October they came to me and said, we need a tire carrier for Daytona. So I had to figure that out and figured out how to carry tires, went to Daytona and went over the wall for Kyle Petty, and was fortunate enough to do it there for 3 or 4 years, then moved over to Roush in 2003 and finished my career up with Mark Martin and Greg Biffle as far as going over the wall.
Pretty amazing. It really is cool. There's a lot that's changed as far as pit crews and what goes into the business in that time. A lot has changed. You've done it for decades now. You've done it, over the wall. You've done it now as the coach, as the manager of human performance. How different is your guys' world and reality as opposed to when you were the one wearing the fire suit?
I would say
totally
different. Totally
yeah.
different. I would say start the question about what's the same. I think the mental makeup of players that are successful, that hasn't changed. As far as the day-to-day, totally different, right? Today, these guys are athletes. All they do to earn a living is go over the wall. When I was starting in the business, almost everyone who went over the wall worked at the shop. You were either a mechanic or whatever your occupation was.
Yeah.
Going over the wall was, I won't call it secondary, but that was your second job, and it was just expected. So if you were physically capable of doing it, then that's what you did.
That's interesting, really. And I would imagine things have gotten a lot more efficient over the years. The expectation is a lot different than it used to be.
The athleticism required.
Yeah, the athleticism.
Has
so from
changed.
the late 70s, how much would you say what happens on pit road and in those pit stalls, how much does that impact the outcome of a race as opposed to late 70s, early 80s?
Well, when I was a child, going to races, Richard Petty would lap the field by 2 laps. So I would say it's critically more important even than it was 10 years ago. It's so difficult now with our cars being more alike between the different organizations and different manufacturers. The ability to pass on the racetrack is very difficult. So at a minimum, you want to maintain on pit road, and if you can gain spots on pit road, then that's even better. But I would say it's as tight as it's ever been. It's as competitive for pit crews as it's ever been, both on the racetrack and on pit road.
It looks competitive. I mean, just being out there on Sundays, you can tell there's a little competitive juice going on between all the different teams there on pit road. What amazes me, this might be a dumb question, but I'm going to ask it anyways because I've thought about it a couple of times. There's not a lot of room in that area. It's such a confined space where these guys are having to stand and prepare to do their work. You have people like me that are, breathing down your neck, that are standing behind that yellow line, that want to get as close to the action as possible. And you're trying to move tires and all that kind of crap. How much of that has to be premeditated of how to work efficiently in close quarters?
I would say that's a part of that.
Is that a dumb question?
No, it's part of the maturation process we talked about. How long does it take an individual to, be able to come in as a rookie and
but you get used to it.
You get used to it. I mean, compartmentalization is very important in sports, right? That's something that sports psychologists in any sports work on, and you just have to be able to compartmentalize. Yeah. Where you're running on the racetrack, the job doesn't change. The mental side of it, if you're running first or 38th, pitting the car is the same. There's no difference from the standpoint of the task. Now, we can get technical in pit box selection and nosing in the car and get into those technical aspects of it, but the fundamental job's the same, whether you're running first or 30th. And the ability to manage that and understand that and have the self-control when you're leading or running second to be able to perform is important.
So let's get into what the week looks like for these guys. And I think it's interesting. Sunday, we know, right? We all watch TV. We all go to the track. We understand what a Sunday looks like. But Monday through Saturday, when, you're not doing all, the time pit stops and stuff like that, what does that look like from a practice, film meeting? Like, what does a pit crew guy go through during the week?
Sure. Monday's usually an off day here. They'll do therapy. Some players come and work out, but it's an off day most days. Rest is important.
Yeah.
And then Tuesday is going to be, for most weeks, is our film review and a practice day. That day, it's going to vary. Our guys are here usually 4 or 5 hours on that day. And then Wednesday.
How much film do you watch? And is it just of the pit guys?
Well, when we watch film as a group, obviously. And then
Okay.
we have with technology today, they're usually on the airplane watching the film on the way home. So it's instantly available. Film review is more, to me, a meeting, of getting everyone together, make sure we're on the same page of what went on the week prior, and then obviously looking towards the upcoming race. Most of the guys have seen film before film review.
What kind of things? I find this also interesting because, again, it happens so fast. It's in and out, and it's really it to me. It's almost like synchronized swimming with how incredible, like in a really neat, fast paced level when it comes to NASCAR. But as far as what everybody's doing in unison, if it doesn't happen in unison, it's going to be an absolute disaster. So it is, in some forms, it's a dance. It's a ballet out there. What are you watching on film? What are you identifying? How can you coach certain guys to be better or change things at different jobs? Because to us watching it, tire in, tire out, fuel in, fuel out. What are you watching on film?
Well, it's interesting you asked that. As much as it is watching film, it's the analytics involved, right? Each position and each pit stop basically has a mathematical equation, right? Of if you do the inputs are this, then the output is X, So it's a combination of looking at data and looking at film. It's not just one or the other. So it's both. Like I said, each position has a mathematical formula for success.
When did that become a thing? When did the analytics, I think we all kind of learn about analytics with Moneyball and Billy Bean and all of that. And it wasn't really that long ago in the, span of history. When did it become the thing to really guide a team, a pit crew, a driver, whatever it is, analytically? When did that become all the rage and something you used to really tell you what you needed to do during a race?
I would say in the last decade, it's really grown within the sport. The access to the data, the data that's produced from each race. It's definitely the last decade. And, it's a tool like anything else that we use. No different than the sports psychologist, but it is a formula. It is a formula to a pit stop.
Were you doing something before by chance where the numbers suggested you shouldn't? Is there anything that maybe you thought gut-wise was the right thing to do that the analytics, I don't know if that's a thing, but did that ever come up?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're talking about player evaluation as much as
anything that you would do in your job that you thought it was the right way, then the numbers said maybe I should tweak it.
Oh, absolutely. It happens. It happens sometimes. Yeah. I mean, what you perceive and what you see, or what you see and what is actually right numerically may not be the same. When it comes to players, we use it as a tool to try to improve them. It isn't, there's a lot of controversy, I believe, in sports on how analytics is used. We primarily want to use it to make our pit stops faster, for sure.
Let's take a break. Scott Bowen is our guest here. Got to talk about his Wolfpack in a few minutes, going to the Final Four. We'll also get into Martinsville a little bit as well. We'll take a break, come back. We got more with Scott Bowen, the human performance manager at Roush Fenway Keselowski. It is Backstretch Banter with RFK on Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. We're back here. It is Backstretch Banter with RFK Racing, Sirius XM NASCAR Radio. We are coming off of Richmond, going to Martinsville this weekend. Scott Bowen is our guest. He's the human performance manager for RFK. I don't know how locked in he's going to be to Martinsville this weekend. I kid when I say that, but his alma mater's kind of having a big weekend coming up. The NC State women's team is in the Final Four. The NC State men's team is in the Final Four. It's so interesting to talk to a Wolfpack guy because there hasn't been a school, and for those that don't know who I am, I work on the college sports side of things for SiriusXM primarily, and I've done that for a while now, since 2005. There hasn't been a school that's been more tortured than NC State, whether it was the COVID baseball thing or the bowl game that was canceled because of COVID, or the fact that the women's team was a 1 seed last year and had to go to UConn to go to, there's been all kinds of things. So, Scott, as a Wolfpacker, is this like an exorcism almost of how good this feels? And to beat Duke to get to the men's Final Four had to be extra, no?
That was wonderful. That was wonderful. My son attends Duke, so he's really had a challenging, really last couple weeks, right? I think we beat him twice here this year, and that doesn't happen very often. But no, proud of those guys and gals, right? To have two teams in the Final Four for Wolfpack fans, it's incredible. We don't get spoiled like this very often.
When did you start getting into this team? Because I think most people gave up on them. And then all of a sudden the ACC tournament ride happens. Did you get engaged then? Did you wait until the NCAAs? I think all Wolfpackers are kind of different, but when did you know this was something that needed to be paid attention to?
I would say after the second game of the ACC tournament.
Mm-hmm.
You know, they went back to what they play? 5 games?
5 games in a row.
5 games in a row. So when they got to 2, I was interested in 3. Like, I don't think they can win 3 in a row, right? Just from a physical standpoint.
Yeah.
But they proved a lot of people wrong, including myself, right? Just from the standpoint
Including
of
me.
Look at who they had to go through, you know, just to win that tournament.
Carolina, Duke a couple of times, Virginia. Think about that Virginia game, and you know, this could be applied to racing in so many ways. There's a moment in the game against Virginia at the end. There's a guy who's an 80% free throw shooter, misses that second free throw and keeps it a 1-possession game. And then NC State goes down, hits the Hail Mary 3, forces overtime, wins, and then goes on to beat Carolina the next night. But if the kid who's an 80% free throw shooter hits the free throw, none of this ever happens. And probably Kevin Keats is fired. So it's incredible how close things can be. And I would imagine you can haunt yourself all day long with woulda, shoulda, couldas in good ways and bad ways. But that's got to be in racing too, right? Like just it's so close how things can go. Like Denny Hamlin last week, and Martin Truex must have been, and I mean, it was obvious he was pissed, but it's amazing how little things impact the storyline in such a big way.
Yes, exactly. Just one little detail. Right? That's really all that was. That player missed one little detail. 8 out of 10 times he's going to hit that shot, but it just so happens the two times out of 10 it came true on that one free throw. So, and then the next shot down the floor was incredible too.
Oh gosh!
But you know, most of the time these Cinderella teams, when they go far, there's usually a game or two where something like that's happened.
And it happened in a glorious way for the Wolfpack. We got 2 minutes. How you feeling about Martinsville with the team, the pit crew, the drivers, everything coming in?
Oh, we're looking forward to that race. It was a very interesting race last fall from a pitting perspective because the tire wear wasn't, the tire fall off wasn't significant, so we didn't have a lot of pit stops. Normally you go to Martinsville, you're going to pit 7 times, 8 times, and we only pitted a few times and had right side tires in play as well, 2 tires. So interested to see if that happens again. We'll be prepared for that. Martinsville's tight, very tight pit road, closed pit road from a standpoint, very narrow. So there's also differences in pit box selection in the corners. You have slope to deal with versus down the front straightaway, it's flat.
It was an absolute pleasure. I learned a lot over the last half hour plus. Scott Bowen, Human Performance Manager at RFK. Scott, awesome to talk to you, man. Thanks a lot for hanging out, and good luck to not only the team, the 6 and 17, but to your Wolfpack this weekend as well, sir.
Thank you very much. Pleasure speaking with you today.
Absolutely. Great to have him. Some thank yous here before we're done. I want to thank everybody who helps this show get on the air every single week. Alec Walt, producer back in Washington, D.C., and then all the wonderful people with RFK, Brandon Lee and Kevin Woods, Thomas Burfield, Elijah Burke. It is a who's who of stars, and they do an incredible job back there with the boys at RFK, and we appreciate everybody that helps us put on the show. We are done for the week. Everybody enjoy Martinsville. For Brandon Lee and Scott Bowen, I'm Chris Childers. We appreciate you listening to Backstretch Banter with RFK Racing on SiriusXM NASCAR Radio Channel 90.